Although many people throughout history have vanished without a trace, the cases surrounded by the most heartbreaking are when the victims are children. Among the cases of children who have seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth, there are those that stand out as particularly bizarre and mysterious. Surrounded by odd details and circumstances, there is a disturbing tendency for some of the stranger vanishings to be of those of children. And in many of these cases, we find mysteries that go a lot deeper than we would ever want to imagine. Join me, and welcome to Tales from the Den. In the summer of 1938, a 4-year-old boy named Alfred Bellhards was on a fishing and camping trip with his family at Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park. As the boy and his parents were taking a hike along a river, Alfred suddenly disappeared without explanation, and the next moment had turned around to find that he was gone, without a trace. There had been no sound or sign of distress. As they were screaming and calling out his name, they were just met with dead silence, and no answer. It seems as though he just vanished. Shortly after, the police and park rangers were called, and although the parents claimed that the boy had gone nowhere near the river, authorities were nevertheless convinced that he had fallen into it, and immediately went about blocking off the riverbank so that it could be thoroughly searched, and that his body would not float away in the current. A 6-mile stretch of the river where Alfred had vanished was searched for a full 5 days, without turning up any sign of the boy. And when the search and rescue bloodhounds were brought in, they strangely tracked his scent to around 500 feet uphill from where the disappearance occurred, which was odd considering he supposedly gone missing as he was walking behind them. What's also strange was that allegedly the bloodhounds followed the trail for some time before reaching a fork in the trail and suddenly stopping and lying down, an odd behavior for trained scent dogs to display, and it seemed that the trail had just abruptly ended. Even more bizarre than this was a report that came in from hikers in the area in the early stages of the search. The hikers were a couple who had been on Old River Road, which was about 6 miles away over rugged terrain and around 3,000 feet higher from where Alfred had disappeared. And at the time, the couple had no idea that there was a missing boy in the area, yet they reported seeing a rather worrying sight. They claimed that they had seen a young boy perched up upon a high ridge in an area called the Devil's Nest, located near the top of Mount Chaplin. The hikers reported that the boy had been sitting alone up there and had suddenly moved out of sight, which the hikers mysteriously said looked as if he were being pulled back by an unseen force. At the time, they could not figure out how such a young boy would be out there in the remote wilderness all by himself, or how he could have possibly climbed up onto that high ridge. Authorities acted on the tip and made the journey out to the Devil's Nest. And there at the top of the ridge, they could not find any trace of the boy. Considering the difficulty of the terrain and the elevation and the steep climb on which the hikers had claimed to have seen the boy, park rangers came to the conclusion that it would have been impossible for the boy to have made the hike out there in the time frame involved on his own. and that he could not have possibly climbed the ridge without specialized climbing equipment and an experienced adult. There are several weird details about this case, like how Alfred managed to just vanish right behind his parents without making a sound, why the bloodhounds stopped following his scent, and how could little Alfred hike all the way up to Mount Chaplin and then climb up onto a high ridge all by himself. We may never know exactly what happened to Alfred, and to this day, the young boy has never been found. The case of a 5-year-old boy named Stephen McCarran, who on September 17th of 1988 was visiting his aunt and uncle's home in Scotland, where his family were taking him to an amusement park and to enjoy their time together. The trip was off to a good start, Stephen seemingly enjoying his time at the theme park, but things would later take a dark turn for the worse. At one point, Stephen was playing on the escalator, and the parents were looking away for just a moment. Yet the boy disappeared, nowhere to be seen. Thinking that Stephen had simply wandered off, the parents did a search of the area, calling out his name, but could find no sign or trace of their son. Increasingly panicked, they notified theme park security, who were also unable to locate the missing boy. After this, the police were notified, and from there would launch one of the largest searches for a missing child in Scotland's history, involving hundreds of people. They all searched the park and a 6-square-mile radius around it, including divers combing the rivers and ponds, and helicopters patrolling the skies, but no sign of Stephen was found. He had simply vanished without a trace. After the disappearance, several strange reports began to trickle in from witnesses who claimed to have seen the missing boy in the days after his vanishing. One such report claimed that the boy had been seen several hours after he had gone missing, in the company of a middle-aged man at the Wonder West World Cafe, during which time the boy was described as looking distressed. Another witness claimed to have seen the boy climbing over the park's fence, and yet others claimed to have seen the boy walking along a nearby road. Authorities were under the impression that Stephen had been kidnapped, but with little to no leads besides the one report of him within the cafe, they didn't have much to go after. And another theory was that he had simply run away. However, that seems highly unlikely. For 2 weeks, the search continued, and then one day, unfortunate news came. On October 2nd, Stephen McCarran's body was found around 6 miles from the theme park and just outside of the search area. An examination of the body found that there were no signs of violence, injury, or foul play, and it was assumed that he had perhaps died of exposure. The strange part was that his body was found in a ditch, in the middle of rough terrain full of marshes, hills, and forests, which would have been hard for an adult to navigate, let alone a young boy, a full 6 miles from where he had gone missing. Oddly enough, when the body was found, his socks were stuffed in his backpack, while his shoes were still on. They questioned, how did he end up there, and why was his socks removed, but his shoes still on? Stephen's family insisted that it was impossible for their son to have willingly left the park and to have ended up there alone, and were convinced that someone had killed and left him there. The detail of the shoes removed and the socks put into the pocket were also suspicious, as Stephen's father claimed that his son had never even been able to take off or tie his shoes on his own. And even if he could, why would he have done such a thing? Despite the family's calls for a deeper investigation, authorities ended up concluding that the boy had wandered off, hiked out there through some of the roughest terrain in Scotland, had taken off his socks and put his shoes back on, before finally succumbing to exhaustion and the elements, and no further investigation was ever brought out after the fact. Now many questioned the police motives behind this, but how could the police suspect that the child did all of this on his own, and for what reason? Everyone questioned why they would do such a thing, and not dig into it deeper. To this day, this is still one of the most unsolved and strange missing child cases in all of Scotland. Three-year-old Jared Adero, who in 1999 was staying with his father at a Christian retreat lodge at the Padre Canyon in Colorado. In October of 1999, Jared's father, Alan, was staying with his two children in the Padre River Resort, a commercial hotel owned by Alan and his twin brother, Arlen. Alan's two children, Jared and Jocelyn, were anxious to go on a camping trip with members of the Christian Singles Network group. At some point during the trip, the 11 members of the group, along with Jocelyn and Jared, decided to take an early afternoon hike up the Big South Trail, which is 15 miles west of the resort. The group split into two, and Jared ran ahead of the group that he was with. The boys stopped to talk to two fishermen, who told investigators later that they didn't think much about Jared being alone, since they had seen the Christian Singles Network about 50 to 80 feet down the trail, unaware that Jared was not related to any of them. And the last time the fishermen said they saw Jared was that he was walking rapidly up the trail near the campsites. After the boy went missing, the group members searched for Jared for roughly an hour, then returned to the resort to inform his father, Alan, about the disappearance. Alan then broke down mentally, getting into his vehicle and sped off towards the location that they were at. The resort manager called the Lamar County Sheriff's Office, and a search and rescue team was deployed. An extensive search for Jared took place, but the search itself was hindered by multiple difficulties, including a media frenzy, and the helicopter used in search for Jared unfortunately crashed, severely injuring the team aboard and destroying the helicopter itself. The Huey UH-1N helicopter from the Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, was the chosen helicopter for the search. It flew to the Fort Collins Loveland Airport to refuel. When the helicopter returned, it struggled with the fuel load and mountain conditions, and stalled out, falling 100 feet and crashing on the Big South Trail. The Lamar County Sheriff, Justin Smith at the time, was a sergeant with the department during the search, and recalled the intensity of the media surrounding Jared's disappearance. TV trucks and newspaper reporters compared the case to the death of the local case of JonBenet Ramsey at the time, another Colorado missing child's case. Later, Smith commented, saying, "I remember from the moment that on the second day, we quickly realized what we were up against. We had searchers down who they were bringing out on stretchers. We had a missing kid overnight, and we had the Air Force closing off the crash site of the helicopter. Emotionally, it was overwhelming, and you could see it in the eyes of everybody involved." As the search went on, news trucks, at least 17 at one time, lined up along Colorado Highway 14. Searchers combed riverbanks and up steep slopes. Dive teams searched in the narrow, slow-moving river. A plane made passes overhead, but was unable to locate Jared. His father later stated that he was critical of them at the time, saying that when you are in a survival situation, you want everything that can be done to be done, and at times, he thought there was so much more they could have done. As the search went on for hours and days, and with no sign of the boy appearing, the search gradually ended, and the case went cold. It would not be until 4 years later that his body would be found, in 2003, when two businessmen, Rob Osborne and Gareth Watts, were hiking together in the Padre Canyon. They came across partial human remains, including a brown polar fleece sweater, a pair of blue trousers, and the Disney Tarzan sneakers that Jared had been wearing when he disappeared. Authorities were notified, and further searching revealed a human molar and a large piece of fractured human skull near the body. And this is where the case gets weird. On the child's head were found a series of unknown scratches that were assumed to be from a mountain lion, but zoologists and big cat experts at the time that the animal would have torn at the body near the neck and stomach, and that the damage on the body was absent, and also the marks on the head did not fit the profile of a cougar, or bear for that matter, and also there were no other apparent injuries on the body. A journalist who was investigating the incident claims that he spoke to the forensics experts on the case who told him that, although the source of the scratches could not be determined, they were not from any known animal. Other details about the body were that the boy's clothes had been turned inside out, and a single tooth from his mouth was placed upon a nearby log. Also unusual is that the body was not overgrown with moss or vegetation. The clothes and shoes themselves were also surprisingly bright colored and clean for having been out there for so long. Adding to this mystery surrounding the case are allegations made by the boy's father that the authorities were very secretive and dishonest about the whole incident, and seemed to be almost intentionally botching the investigation. One example is when the family allegedly was threatened with arrest if they tried to go off looking around on their own, near the area where the disappearance occurred. And although it was claimed by authorities that the trail was the only way in or out of the canyon, this turned out to be false, as Alan found records of various other entry and exit points. And another oddity was that Alan claimed that he had discovered that police were using his own clothing as a scent sample for the dogs rather than those of his son, and that when confronted about this, they got confrontational and irritated, allegedly going so far as to threaten to call off the search. Alan would also claim that although some unknown hair samples had been collected from his son's sweater, no test results were ever released, and he was told that they were neither human nor mountain lion, but that he shouldn't worry about it. And to top it all off, the journalist also claims that the FBI refused to get involved. So what exactly happened to Jared? It seems we may never know. Thanks for watching. Till next time.